If you like dinosaurs and you appreciate epic sculptures, then you've come to the right place. In this episode, I'm going to show you how I built this amazing Stegosaurus out of scrap metal. Let's get stuck into it.
Picture this. It's 1993, you're 10 years old and Jurassic Park has just hit the cinemas. You're already a dinosaur lover, but now, as you watch the most mind-blowing movie of your life, you've officially become obsessed. By the time the credits roll and the lights come back on, you've made yourself a promise that one day you're going to have your own dinosaur. Well, that's my most vivid childhood memory. Fast forward 30 years and genetic cloning hasn't come as far as I'd hoped. But I do have a welder and a bunch of wine barrel rings left over from another project I just finished. So if now's not the time to make this happen, then when? So this project's going to be pretty freestyled. I've never built a sculpture before, especially not a dinosaur sculpture. One thing I know I'm going to need is some kind of template, so I've traced out a basic Stegosaurus shape on the concrete to follow. I'm going to make a couple of T-shaped legs out of RHS. These will just act as a scaffold to build everything off, and they'll get cut away at the end. Then I'm going to take a bunch of 10mm round bar and I'm just going to loosely bend it into shape and weld it onto this scaffolding. My thinking with making this two-dimensional structure is you'll create a silhouette and I'll be able to stand back and get a good visual as I'm filling out the body and starting to develop its shape and its size. I didn't need any special tools to bend this round bar. I was actually quite surprised how easy it did bend, and I found the easiest technique was to just put it under my boot and yoink on it. And when I said I had a lot of these wine barrel rings kicking around, I was not joking. And if you're wondering why, you can go and check out my episode on wine barrel rocking chairs. But for now, we've got a Stegosaurus to build. And after digging all these rings out, I've already realized that this is not going to be as straightforward as I thought. Each ring is a different size, they're different thicknesses, they've got a different taper, and the material thickness is different on each ring, which means they're not all going to weld the same. And I am by no means a welding expert. I would classify my welding skill as enough to get me by, at least when it comes to building a Stegosaurus. And because the steel on each ring is a different thickness, unless I wanted to keep going and adjusting my welding settings for each ring, I just kind of adapted my technique depending on how thick the steel was on each ring. For example, when I was doing the thinner ones, I just kind of did a series of small tacks until I got it stuck on. And the thicker ones, I was able to lay down a full bead. At the end of the day, this is yard art, it's not a structural piece, so it really doesn't matter if the welds are a bit boogery. As long as it doesn't blow apart in the first wind, I'll be happy. And now that we've got the body done, we're going to move on to the legs. The legs. The legs kept me up at night, and I'm not even kidding. I racked my brain so many nights, how am I going to make these things three-dimensional and pack as much feature into them as I could. After a lot of back and forth and contemplation, I threw all that to the wind and decided just to make them two-dimensional. This was really just to benefit my sanity. The whole reason I was building this dinosaur was to have fun and to reignite that inner child and do something just for the sake of doing it. Just because it's cool. It's only to satisfy me so I can make it however I want. And that's the beauty of it. Once I removed the pressure, I actually really enjoyed making these legs. I really enjoyed the simplicity of it and just getting back to basics. So I just kind of went with the old hand bending technique for the first couple of legs. And then I had one of those aha moments. And I remembered something I'd seen someone else doing when they were bending some round bar. They made their template and they put a bunch of screws in, and then they just bent it around the screws. And that was so much easier. And I know what you're thinking, these kind of look like chicken drumsticks. And that leads me to my question. What do you think dinosaur would taste like? Do you reckon it tastes like chicken? They're supposed to be related to birds, aren't they? And something I put up with for way too long was the hole in the thumb of my glove. I don't know how many times I burnt myself, hence why I keep dropping this leg, welding it on. Eventually, I decided it was way more productive to just go and buy some new gloves from my local hardware store than to persevere. But up until I decided to do the 20-minute round trip to go and get new gloves, I just kind of kept tucking my thumb into the palm of my glove so it wouldn't get burnt. This actually made it really hard to hold anything, so if you have a hole in your thumb, just go and get some new gloves. And now that I've got these leg silhouettes tacked in place, it's time to start thinking about the next step. And the next step is to make these legs at least appear to be solid. And all I did was add a heap of 50mm flat bar, and I just cut it into lengths, and I just contoured it to the shape of the legs. Nothing fancy, kept it two-dimensional. All they need to do is hold this guy up, And if you're thinking that these legs are going to be really flimsy and probably won't hold the weight, you are 100% correct. I am going to go ahead and reinforce everything later, but that's not critical at this point, so I'll move on. So far I'm really happy with this, but standing back, it kind of looked a little bit too much like just a bunch of wine barrel rings welded together. I've had this big old chain in the corner of my workshop for, I don't know, a couple of years, ever since we moved in. It's something that's just been laying around. I've been dying to use it, and it just so happened that it's the perfect length. And I thought it'd be a really good way to add some texture and break up a lot of these straight lines. So, what do you call a blind dinosaur? A do you think *𝗙𝗪saurus? And what do you call a blind dinosaur's dog? A do you think *𝗙𝗪saurus rex? And that's probably got to be one of my favourite scenes from the Jurassic Park movie. It still tickles me so much to this day, and it just goes to show that even as a kid, I enjoyed my dad jokes. And after I welded the chain down the spine, my wife came out and said, you know what would look really cool? Welding some chain around the outside of the legs. So I popped off to the hardware store, bought about 10 meters of chain and welded it on the outside of all the legs. And it was such a great call because once again, it added a bunch more texture and really just broke up the monotony of all the straight lines. And when it came to the head, I was both excited and absolutely packing myself. The head is such a defining feature of this, and if I get it wrong, it doesn't matter how good the body looks, it's just gonna look horrible. The shape's really important, the size is really important. If he has a little pea head, he's just gonna look weird. The head is gonna be a very complex thing to make. It's very contoured in its shape. There's a lot of curves and there's a lot of little subtle defining features that really make it look like a head. And on top of that, this is the first sculpture I've ever made. And I'm not a great metal worker. I'm a pretty decent welder and I can make things like benches and whatever. When it comes to things that require a lot of shaping and finesse, I'm pretty much new to it. I've never really done anything at this scale. So I was really feeling the pressure, but I decided to just get going on it, stop overthinking it, and just keep making progress. And really just trying to pay attention to one thing at a time. So the first thing I had to figure out was the size of the head. Once I had the scale locked down, I could start thinking more on the details like position of the eyeballs, where I want the nostrils to go, the shape of the beak, what the beak was going to look like. Stegosaurus kind of had almost like a bird beak, like a parrot. They ate a lot of seeds and nuts and kind of had sort of an overbite. So I had to take all that into consideration. I really wanted the beak to look like a beak, like I wanted that to be a standout feature. So that's sort of where I put most of my attention when making the head. I used a lot of just bent flat bar. When it came to the beak, I used heaps of this round bar just bent around a pole, cut it into sections and just tacked it in place. It just gave heaps of contrast and made the beak really stand out from the rest of the head. For the eyes, I came up with something really simple, but I think it's really effective. I had a piece of this 40mm galvanized pipe and I just cut two sections kind of at an angle. And then for the actual eyeball, I just incorporated the bottom of a couple of soda cans, tacked everything together, and I think it actually turned out really cool. It's kind of got that like 1920s sci-fi robot kind of look. And man, am I relieved to have this head done. I'm so pleased that it's finally behind me and I can move on. And what's a Stegosaurus without Stegosaurus-y bits? This is the bit that got me fired up to build a Stegosaurus in the first place. Tail spikes and his back blades. And I'm so glad that I put that chain on because now I've got the perfect thing to weld all these spikes onto. And I'm kind of considering myself a bit of a genius at this point. That might have a bit to do with the fact that for the first time in this entire build, I actually know what I'm doing. This is the only time where I had formulated any plan. I already knew what I was going to do for the spikes and for the blades. And I feel like using the wine barrel staves for the tail spikes really helps identify the wine barrel rings as wine barrel rings. If anyone looks at it and they're not quite sure what it was made out of, I feel that the tail spikes are a little bit of a hint. But there is definitely no mistaking corrugated iron, and nothing screams Aussie bush or yard art more than corrugated iron. It was also another way that allowed me to bring a bit more contrast and a different texture into the piece as well. And all I did was cut out a heap of different sized blades out of the corrugated iron, and then I fabricated a heap of little tabs out of flat bar, and then I welded those onto the chain, and then all the blades got pop riveted onto those. And I'm absolutely stoked with the way these blades came out. And as an added bonus, when the wind gets up, they kind of move, they flap about, and they look really awesome. At this point of the build, You'd think I'd be pretty stoked with how this thing's turned out. And don't get me wrong, I am. But it just looks a little too new. I think it can be even better. I really want this thing to weather. However, I'm a little impatient, so I'm going to give it a little bit of a head start. First, I'm going to give it a treatment with some hydrochloric acid to sort of etch into the galvanizing. Now, I researched how to do this on some other YouTube videos, but as I mentioned, sometimes I'm a little impatient and I didn't watch the entire of the YouTube videos. I was unaware that you have to neutralize the acid, and I just assumed that you just wash it off with water. That's not the right way to do it. If you're going to do it, please do proper research. Don't do what I did. It worked, but apparently it's not the right way. And second stage in the process, once it was dry, I mixed up some really salty solution, diluted a heap of salt in some hot water, let it cool, and just went to town, sprayed this thing everywhere. I am absolutely stoked with how this turned out, guys. The aging process gave it that final polish it needed. I went back through and reinforced all the leg structure. I've removed the T-braces and I've got him sitting under his own weight. And I have to admit, he looks absolutely at home in this landscape, especially when the wind animates his tail and his back blades. That's something I really wasn't expecting, and I think it's really cool. I'd absolutely love to get your feedback on this whole process in the comments. And if you'd like to see me make some more epic and weird and wonderful things, make sure you hit that subscribe button, share the videos amongst your family and friends. I really appreciate your support, guys, and I could not do this without yous. And I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.